Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Forge Your Trail podcast. Forge Your Trail is a program made possible by a grant from Oklahoma Human Services through Oklahoma Child Support Services. Our mission is to provide educational resources and support services for Oklahoma parents, with a focus on helping fathers improve their relationship with their children. We also teach a parenting class called On My Shoulders that is free of charge for participants. To learn more about our program and upcoming class sessions, please visit our website at fyt.oucpm.org. Today, our guest is Dr. John Duncan. Dr. Duncan is someone I've known for many, many years now. He was a faculty member at the University of Oklahoma. He's a former undercover law enforcement agent. And today we're going to talk to John about the impact of drugs on the human brain and human physiology of the brain. So first of all, John, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you became an expert on drugs and their impact on the human brain?
Yeah, I started law enforcement back in 1980, and I was just finished my master's degree and all my coursework for a PhD then at OU. And so I got into Norman PD, and that overlapped with my going to college for a while, and became a Norman police officer and then an undercover officer for Norman in what they call their special ops. And then in 85, I went to the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. And I was assigned, in that time, I was assigned to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. And back in those days, we had what they call cross designation. And that meant that I had a Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics credential, and I was also a federal DEA agent at the same time. And they used us, and I could go anywhere in the United States or its territories representing, law enforcement and have law enforcement powers. So that was good. And I got to meet people all across the country involved in different types of narcotic investigations. In Oklahoma at that time, we were working in a lot of meth labs. And this was a brand new phenomenon in the United States. Up until that point, people that wanted stimulants were getting their stimulants from pharmaceutical diversion. They were going to the diet docs and so forth and getting amphetamines. After that became illegal, we started seeing a new market emerge. And this was in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, where drugs were really becoming a big deal in the NES. And a number of different places saw the attempt to manufacture amphetamines. Turned out the Hells Angels got a chemist from UCLA, a young graduate student, and applied him with strippers, and he started manufacturing amphetamines for them. And it all came to a head in Altamont with the Rolling Stones concert when they hired the Hells Angels to do their security. And the Hells Angels were all on amphetamines and selling amphetamines, and it turned into this giant riot. So that's where, and the name crank actually came from that, because they would take these amphetamines and put them in the crankcase of the motorcycles that are some derelict motorcycles they were hauling up that way. And that was where they camouflaged and started out of the crankcase, and they were calling it crank.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So anyway, it was becoming a thing, and Oklahoma was number 4 in the United States. California was first, Texas second, Oregon, Oklahoma, Washington State. So we were in that mix. And I became the meth guy and worked with chemists over at OSBI that taught me all the different recipes. We'd get a new recipe, and at that point we would go over to OSBI and cook it. And so I've cooked hundreds of times. I've cooked different types of drugs over there and learned about them because I had to know about them. I was, sometimes representing myself as a meth cook, other times as a consumer of these things. So I had a lot of roles to play. But in that process, I became very interested in the drug and what it was doing to the mind, the brain, and why the people were acting the way they were, which was crazy, psychopathic, so to speak, most of the time. And at the same time, I had actually been working on a PhD from way back. And I got my PhD in 98. But by that point, I was already studying psychopharmacology and neurobiology at the OU College of Medicine. And after I got the PhD, I did postdoctoral research in psychopharmacology and in neuroscience. And I guess it was in '98 they also appointed me as a clinical associate or a clinical assistant professor, and then in 2007 they promoted me to an associate professor there at the College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. In '98, I was also starting out with where I met you, Frank, at the College of Liberal Studies, teaching more philosophical type classes, philosophy and ethics and so forth there. And so anyway, I continued my career in law enforcement until 27. I was the chief agent at that point at the Oklahoma State Bureau of Narcotics when I retired, and then went to work full-time as a professor in what was then called liberal studies at OU and now is called the professional and continuing studies. I'm still a professor there. I'm an associate professor, and then I'm an associate professor in psychiatry at the College of Medicine. So during all that, my major interest has been what do drugs do to the brain? How do they affect the brain? What do we expect when we see someone doing drugs? How are the different operations of the brain causing changes in the person we know?
Now, you used a couple of terms, psychopharmacology and what was the other one?
Neurobiology, neuroscience. Yeah.
Can you give a simple definition of what?
Psychopharmacology is just what do different drugs do to the brain? These are, so if you're doing Adderall or if you're taking Xanax or something like that, the area of pharmaceutical studies that would deal with that is going to be psychopharmacology, as the drugs that affect the brain. So I spent a lot of time studying that, and I studied well outside of the street drugs, but my interest was drugs that were street drugs, although the mechanisms of the brain are really the same, and you just have to understand how that works, and you can tell what the drugs are going to do and what systems they affect and how that changes human behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, John, I know that a part of your work with the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs was to get the law passed that put Sudafed and you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. We were spending, I did a study. It was probably in 91, maybe 92. And we found that the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics was spending, along with every other state agency that was affected peripherally, like even the burn center was a certain amount of people coming into the burn center were coming in from burns they got at a meth lab. And so we took all this data, cracked it, and found out that it was costing the state of Oklahoma a little over $100,000 per meth lab. And and we were doing maybe 1,400 meth labs a year. And we were getting a little help from the feds. And then this expense was spread through a lot of agencies. Some agencies we couldn't really get any numbers from, let's say Department of Human Services, because so many families were broken because of this. So many kids were in foster care. So many parents were in trouble, all of that sort of thing. You just couldn't quantify it. So it was probably a lot more than that. But that plus a real tragedy. We had a trooper murdered by someone going out to get anhydrous ammonia out of a farm tank, stealing it, so he could go back and make meth. And that guy happened to be a Lawton firefighter. Ricky Malone, and he killed Nicky Green, the trooper, murdered him. His execution style is a bad thing. And so Nicky's widow, and his children would show up to every committee meeting. I wrote the law along with some other people, Scott Rowland, who's now an appellate court justice in the state of Oklahoma, Lonnie Wright, who is dead now. He was the director at the time. And we got that thing passed because of all the people that were really involved. I think it would never have passed if Nicky Green's widow hadn't been there. She gave it a reality.
Right.
So we got that passed, and then everybody hated me because you could only get so much Sudafed. But it stopped the big Sudafed deals that we were seeing. I mean, 1 million tablets of Sudafed or 300,000 tablets of Sudafed out of a little convenience store, back door out of a convenience store. They're selling more Sudafed than they are gasoline in retail. So we were having a big problem with that in Oklahoma. As soon as that law passed, two things happened. One, the labs in Oklahoma dropped off like a marble off the edge of a table down to 6 or 7 a year. Okay, the other thing that happened, like the week we passed the law, is that the Sinaloa cartel got 60 metric tons of Sudafed from China. And so on the streets of Oklahoma, you didn't see one change in the street drug. You didn't see a change. If you went to a bar, a gram of methamphetamine was cost you about $100. And after we passed the law, you'd go to the bar and get a gram of methamphetamine for about $100. But what changed was it wasn't made in Oklahoma, and we weren't having to pay all that extra money. So we stopped the meth labs, or we really had a strong impact on the meth labs in Oklahoma, but we didn't stop meth. And that's something that's beyond I think, the ability of any government to do. There's so many factors involved in stopping the flow of drugs.
Wow. So Oklahoma, I believe, was the first to pass that kind of a law?
We were first in the United States. We had to go up against some major pharmaceutical companies that had a lot of money to spend on lobbying and so forth, trying to get that from happening. And we had one legislator that didn't vote for it. Ultimately, every other legislator in Oklahoma voted for it, both in the House and the Senate. But I'm not going to tell you which one.
So, John, what are some of the most common drugs that affect the brain, and how do they work?
Well, I mean, the reason people use drugs in the first place is they affect the brain. I mean, they wouldn't use them if they didn't do anything. So every drug that you use that affects the brain has some positive and some negative, and you can take, for example, marijuana, cannabis. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol is the active ingredient in marijuana, and there's a therapeutic range. You just can't do all you want, but there's a range where it's actually useful as a psychopharmacological treatment. Okay, we're still working with figuring out exactly where that is. There's a lot of diverse science on it, and I've tried to pin it down, but I've not been able to really be able to tell you this is how many milligrams you ought to take for these different conditions. But there is an endocannabinoid system in the brain or in the body, and that is affected by it. Okay, now when you get to higher levels, you start getting high, you start getting changes in your brain, your perceptual world changes, a lot of things happen there, and that changes your brain. Unfortunately, it's not just for fun then, because when you start changing consciousness and brain activity at that level and messing with it, so to speak, the brain actually recalibrates to that and makes some changes of its own, biological changes that follow what you're doing with the drugs. For example, Adderall is it's dextromethamphetamine is what it is. It's nothing but meth.
Okay.
And it's pure meth. Okay, so we give it to kids, when they're not paying attention. Now, at a certain point, that becomes a big issue. How much Adderall are you going to take, and what kind of brain are you giving it to in the first place? Now, if you're giving Adderall to someone who truly does have attention deficit problems, you give them just enough to stimulate the brain. If you give them too much, it has the opposite effect, because there's a different receptor. It's called a D2 dopamine receptor that's in the front lobe of the brain mostly. The D1 dope receptors are in the reward area of the brain mostly. And so each one of those does a different thing. The D1 activates, the D2 shuts down. So if you're doing a lot of meth, what you're doing is really activating the middle part of the brain, the part that wants now, that's hungry, that goes out and seeks and chases and tries to get this and that and the other, and that looking for a reward. And then you're driving that at the expense of the part that thinks about it and the part that can figure out that maybe I ought not to do this and control the impulse. So you're shutting that part down, and you're really doing more. That's addiction in a nutshell right there. That's what addiction is. It's a disease of the brain, and it is a disease of the seeking system of the brain and the reward system that is hooked to that. It becomes pathologically connected to a certain behavior and a certain type of stimulus that is not necessarily associated with the reason that path exists. The reason that path exists is to survive. You have to get warm if you're cold. You have to eat when you're hungry. You have to drink when you're thirsty. And we have drives for that. Okay, when you hijack those drives and you multiply them by 100 or more, or 1,000, and you have that strong a drive for a particular thing that overpowers all the other drives, but that thing doesn't give you any survival quotient at all. It doesn't do anything for you. It's a lie there. And on the other hand, you've got therapeutic index over here that you can deal with. You can, if you do these things in smaller quantities, they're going to actually be good for you. They'll help you. They'll tweak your brain. You just don't want to tweak it too much. That's the key. And that's what the big issue is with drugs in the brain.
So you talk about appropriate levels, but when you're buying street drugs, you can't really get a dose.
Oh, you don't have any idea what you're getting. I'll tell you a story real quick. When I was a Norman policeman, I went into to the ER. I had this gal that had been involved in a car wreck. And in the process, somehow she bit her tongue, but it was really bad. I mean, she lacerated her tongue halfway off. Okay, and she was bleeding profusely. And she was over there with the ER doc. He was trying to get in there and clamp it off and start sewing things up and all. And she just kept spitting blood in his face and everything. And this, of course, was way before HIV or any of that was known. And so it was just blood in his face at that point. Well, he told me, he said, do something with her. So I handcuffed her to a chair, rolled her back to what they call the doctor's lounge, which is where they went to smoke back then. And there was this ashtray. It looked like a big bird bath there, cigarettes stubbed out in it and everything. And this gal chewed her tongue off in front of me and spit it in that. It was horrible. So I go back down there and I've got this tongue in an ashtray, and I show it to the doc, and he's freaking out, and she's gurgling at this point. And we have to get her mouth open. He has to pinch that off with a clamp, and next thing you know, he couldn't reattach the half of a tongue that she had spit in the ashtray. Well, okay, come to find out, I mean, she lived, she was recovered, but she couldn't, use her tongue as well. She couldn't talk as well, I'm sure. But what happened? I began to look into that, and I found out that all she had done is she smoked about a half a joint of marijuana. What she didn't realize is somebody had cut it with PCP. And PCP, you can't feel pain. You go into the psychotic episodes with it because it does some things to the brain, and it makes you disoriented. It's a dissociative anesthetic, and so you dissociate from your body, and that causes people to be really paranoid. So anyway, that's what happened. So you never know what you're going to get, and that's what's happening right now with fentanyl. Most of the time, people that overdose from fentanyl are not they don't believe they're getting fentanyl. They don't know it's got fentanyl in it. But the cartels now, who are bringing most all the drugs, except for marijuana, but most all the drugs into the United States, and marketing it around here, are beginning to they found out that they could cut these drugs down to lower potencies, but then put a little fentanyl in and nobody could tell. And because it's still going to activate the reward system. And as long as your reward system is activated, you'll seek the drug. It doesn't matter what the drug is. And they know that. So they'll actually make it more addictive for you. And then people will get cocaine. They'll do cocaine like they had been doing cocaine previously. And it turns out that the cocaine itself is adulterated to the point that, they're doing overdoses of fentanyl. But if they were just doing cocaine, they wouldn't be. And that's what happens. People get in trouble with it. They may think they're doing heroin, and they've been doing heroin for a while. They know that they can do this much heroin and it's going to be okay. Next thing you know, somebody cut it with fentanyl, and they're laying there dead with a needle in their arm. So this is what's happening right now. Is people just don't know what they're getting on the street.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like that the reward seeking system of the brain is really involved in the addictive process. Can you talk to us a little bit about how a person becomes addicted and how can they get off? I know that sometimes methamphetamine, I understand, is one of the more particularly virulent addictive substances. Can you maybe give us information about other drugs?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many different drugs out there that are addictive, and in the nature of addiction, we can talk about drugs, but we can also talk about behavioral addictions like gambling and sex addiction and all these other kinds of addictions. Some of them actually are quite acceptable, like adrenaline addiction. You can go jump out of airplanes all day long if you can afford it, and parachute, and skydive and do all of that. And there's nothing illegal about it, but people could get addicted to it, the adrenaline. But let's talk about just the drugs, okay? Because that's the prevalent notion of addiction that we have here. All right. We used to just call it the reward system. The guy that taught me about a redefinition of that was a neuroscientist. His name was Jacques Panscap. And he passed away a few years ago. Matter of fact, I was emailing him at the time, and he quit emailing me. I thought he was mad at me, and I found out he had died. But Dr. Panscap, he redefined that as our seeking systems. And we have a need for survival. The reason the brain evolved in order to make us do something other than just sit here like a plant is so that we could feed ourselves, so that we could take care of ourselves as an entity. And every living creature has this. We go out and we seek food. We seek temperate environments. We seek mates so that we can propagate our species and continue the life. And all of those things, warmth when we're cold, cooler when we're hot, water, all the things we have to live, all of that is wired into the brain. And cues in our environment, and both inside and outside, tell us, activate these and tell us to go seek this or seek that. Okay, drugs work with that because we normally go, let's say we're hungry and we like barbecue sandwiches, and we imagine one, and then we smell some barbecue and we think, I got to get one. And so I get a barbecue sandwich, I eat it, and I think, well, wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, but that was pretty good, and I'm happy. I'm not hungry anymore, at least. Okay, so it's over with. Okay, so that's the reward system at work. Okay, now what happens when you do a drug? It could be any drug out here. It could be a stimulant or a depressant, because they both work with the same reward system. And I could explain that, but there's a way of understanding how two things can do the same thing to the brain. But the drug then gives you so much more drive. I mean, one, it for dopamine, for example, that's the drive chemical for the brain. Okay, let's say that I am after that barbecue sandwich. The dopamine is flowing right now, but it's not all the dopamine I have. It's just a little bit. It's making me want to go a barbecue sandwich. After talking like this, I may have to go eat one afterwards. But if I give myself a drug that releases 100% of the dopamine that I have, that hijacks the entire system and floods my brain with dopamine, that's the most I've ever wanted anything in my life. And then when I get it, it gives me the biggest, baddest reward I've ever had. Okay, that's pretty impressive for the brain. The brain says, whoa, now I've been hunting for the wrong kind of critter. That barbecue sandwich is nothing now. I want some more meth. Okay, now that affects different people different ways. Some people can deal with it for a while. Nobody can deal with it forever. But some people can, just say, okay, wow, that was something. I didn't really like it. It was just a little much. And they can just never do it again. Some people will say, that was a trip, wow. And the downside is you feel really bad after you come down from all this. But then they don't do it much. They do it every once in a while. And then you have people that do it every once in a while, but every once in a while gets closer and closer together. And finally, it's life and death for them all the time. Okay, let's look at what's going on in the brain. Okay, first of all, you're recalibrating that brain. You're initially recalibrating the reward system. There's a place in the brainstem called the ventral tegmental area, and that's where dopamine's released. And I'm just taking one out of maybe 150 different brain chemicals, but they're all involved. But this is the main one for most addiction. And it is projecting into what's called the nucleus accumbens, which is right behind your eyes, right in the brain behind your eyes. And that's the area that has two functions. One is it receives the reward chemicals and causes you to go out and look for something. And then it also has a side that once you find that thing behaviorally, it shuts down the dopamine and releases serotonin, which is a feel-good chemical. And it says, finally, I feel good. The serotonin chemical, you're satiated. You don't want to get up and do anything anymore. With dopamine, you want to go find some more. Okay, what happens when the nucleus accumbens then starts wearing off? It sends a signal back over to the ventral tegmental area saying, let's go find some more. And that becomes a loop. Now, not only is it a behavioral loop, but it's a neurological loop because you're changing the nerves. The brain cells are actually changing, genetically changing. It's called epigenetics, where this stimulation causes all these different messengers to go back into the nucleus of the cell, release messenger RNA of a genetic transcript that produces more receptors, more of the receptors that are long-term potentiation, which is involved in something they call neuroplasticity, which changes the brain, changes those cells to do that more often. That's their go-to pattern now. And it becomes that loop. The more involved you get with the drugs, the more strengthening you do of that loop in brain cells, the more you actually are wiring those brain cells to do one thing, and that is seek the reward. Well, as you do more of this, the nucleus accumbens gets desensitized. The reward part of it does. And so serotonin is just not doing it very well for it. So you get less reward, so it drives you even stronger to go back and do more meth. And you're doing more and more, and your quantities are going up and everything else. And let's say you're putting fentanyl in that, like we were talking about earlier. You're actually involved in a drug addiction where you're going into more and more drug use. You're actually using greater quantities of drugs. Okay, well, if you've got just a little bit of fentanyl in that, and it's starting, and you don't realize it, but you're increasing this dose of fentanyl. Fentanyl has side effects like to the heart, to the respiratory system, to the brainstem. It deadens those things. It sedates him, and you can die. And that's what kills you with fentanyl is you overdose, you quit breathing. The actual nerves that cause your lungs to work and your heart to beat and everything else in your body to go are sedated, and they don't do anything. They just lay there and you just die. So that's where fentanyl comes into play. But the addiction is actually that process there of hijacking that away from the normal activities that we have of everyday living, and then finding a new object that is much more powerful in setting up a drive for us.
Mm-hmm.
And now, how do you get out of it? That was your second part of your question.
Yes.
Okay. It takes help. I mean, you just don't one day. I mean, a lot of people can just say, "Oh, I'm never going to do it again," but it's a real struggle. And a good thing about the brain is when you start changing your patterns of behavior, those connections weaken, and it takes a while. So nobody just quits doing it, blindly and everything else. The brain still wants it. And at the same time, you've been shutting down the part of the brain, the front of the brain, is more blood flow and everything that you've got going in the middle part of the brain, which is where this reward system is, the less you've got going in the front part of the brain. And then we talked about earlier the D2 receptors up there, that if you have a lot of dopamine get released, the D2 receptors are saying this is more than the front of the brain can handle, so let's shut it down. And so you're really destroying your inhibition control areas of the brain. You're getting where they're less involved. And of course, the brain's like anything else, you use it or lose it. And so you begin to lose cognitive control of your impulses. And that's a very vital part. So how do you regain those things? It takes a lot of time. It takes effort. It takes the help of other people. It takes commitment from inside, deep inside, some existential level commitment, I believe. Some people can get that through religion, other people other ways, but it has to be something that's vital to you and means everything to you at that basic level. And when it gets to that point, you're willing. And that's what you have to be doing first, is willing. And then, now it's day to day. And so as you do it day to day, you get better at it. It maybe never goes away, but you're better. David Smith, who founded the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, was a friend of mine. And he was telling me, we were in Tulsa one time, and he was the first addictionologist in the United States. I learned a lot from this guy.
Addictionologist?
Addictionologist. He was the first guy that opened an addiction clinic, and he opened it on Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. Well, he was doing a conference here, and he and I were friends at that time, and had become friends because I call him and ask him questions, And he and I were going to go out and do something. And I said, "Well, man, I really like jazz." He said, "I do too." I said, "Let's go hear some jazz." He said, "Well, first of all, where is it?" I said, "Well, there's a jazz bar down there." He said, "I can't go." He said, "I've been sober, and it's like 35 years or something like that." He said, "But if I go into a bar, I don't know that I'm not going to take a drink. And if I take a drink, I'm going to wake up in about 3 weeks and I won't have a penny to my name, and I'll be living in a box in an alley somewhere."
Wow.
And he said, that's how bad it was for me.
Wow.
But he was sober for 30 some years, but he knew where he shouldn't go, and he knew, even as smart as he was, brilliant man, he knew better than to do that. Yeah. So that's what you have to learn. You have to be willing to make that decision. Decision making is real important. So when I decide about my life in this moment, I have the power to make that decision. It's not something I can say, "Oh, well, I'll just do it this one time." Once you do it, you've quit. That's the time you stopped. And so you got to keep making that decision over and over. Yeah, every day. And every moment of that day, you got to know your limitations, and you have to make the decision.
So that's very mentally exhausting for people to fight that battle every day.
That's why they need help. They need to eat right. They need to drink a lot of hydration, They need people that are there for them. They need a release somehow. They find a release besides getting high. And then they need some kind of inside spiritual values that give them something to lean on. That's where a lot of the addiction programs talk about having, a higher power, a commitment to a higher power. I think you can do it existentially. I think you don't have to necessarily have a particular view of God, or you don't have to call that God. I think you can very well rely on God. But I think on the other hand, you can find that strength in your own spirit as well.
So at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how methamphetamine was impacting the entire state system. Mm-hmm. Children coming from broken homes, divorces, violence, so on and so forth. Suppose we have somebody out there that is struggling right now with this addiction. What do you think is the first step for them if they want to beat that? You said earlier it's just a decision, but is there something else that they should think about doing?
Oh, yeah, I'll tell you. And I'm not just going to talk about meth. I'll talk about any addiction at this point. This is addiction in general, and that's kind of what I've been sort of talking about. But the first thing you have to do is is admit the fact and recognize, know yourself. I mean, it goes all the way back to Plato and to Socrates, who was Plato's mentor, who said, "Know thyself." And you got to know yourself, and you got to be honest with yourself. And that's the hardest part, because it's easy to deny it. We do that all the time. We lie to ourselves so well. So you got to get to the point where you don't lie to yourself about this anymore. This is real. This is your life. It's right now. You got to do this. And you have to actually make that commitment to try to get past this and realize that there's a reason why you want to do that. The reason is this is messing you up. It's ruining your life. Now you've lost how many relationships? You've got now all these ailments that you had that you didn't have. You're broke. You've got warrants out for you, whatever, you've got all this stuff going on. You've been to prison, got out, because you were doing drugs or doing something to get drugs, basically. And, all of these things, coalesce into a really troubled life. And there's a doorway to get out of that life, and that's a decision. That's it. That's how you get out of this life into the next life, is you make a decision. But that decision has to be longitudinal. It's something that you make and that you live by now. Once you make the decision, you got to live by it. Okay, that's the hardest part. Once you get that and get that in place, then there are facilities and treatment and people that are willing to help you out here. Services, social services like DHS, the things you guys offer. Lots and lots of different things that people can get into, treatment facilities and so forth. I think you have to move forward. One of the things that I actually personally use is a routine, So I get up in the morning. I get up at the same time every morning. I don't care how much sleep I got. If I didn't get a lot of sleep, I still get up at the same time in the morning. I get up in the morning. I drink a pre-workout drink. I know exactly what's in it. I know exactly how much I drink. I don't think about it. This is not a thought.
Just automatic.
This is a commitment I made.
Nice.
I go out in my gym and I work out for 2 hours. And then I come back in and I drink my protein. Okay. Then I do my work, my OU work online. And then my day's mine. Okay. I haven't made a decision yet. Okay. So the first 4 or 5 hours of my day, I didn't make any decisions. I fulfill commitments. That's it. Because if you say, well, am I going to work out today? And you get up and you think, oh, it's cold out there. I'm not going to. Well, you gave yourself a decision where you should have had a commitment. You should have had the self-discipline and a commitment. So that commitment is a hard thing to come by. It's not easy. And then once you have it, you better do it. Because if you say it's okay to not be committed one day, then it's not okay. It's okay not to. So then the next time you have a little, then it's, oh, I don't want to do it. I did it yesterday, that kind of stuff. And you can't do that with drugs. I mean, I can do it with exercise. Yeah, I can get back out. I can get out of my routine because it's too cold. I can get back in it the next day or something. But I just use that as an example of how you get past that moment. Okay, how do you drive that moment? By the time that I actually have my day to myself, I have a record of accomplishments that I've made. And my brain has become used to my psychology, my behavior, and all that have become, the momentum is that I'm going to go out and accomplish all these things I want to accomplish. Okay, by that point, I've already done that. And so it helps me get more done in my day. Okay, it helps me get through the rest of the day without making stupid mistakes. And God knows I've made plenty of stupid mistakes.
We all have, John.
You've known me long enough to know that I've made some real stupid mistakes. So anyway, I think those are important. And okay, so let's say you're a parent. You're a parent, you have a child that's, they're doing drugs, they're messing up, they're making the wrong decisions. Well, one thing about kids is their brains change faster and their brains are still developing. So if you deny oxygen and blood to an area of the brain that is not even fully developed, like the prefrontal lobe in people that are teenagers, that doesn't really lock in together the nerves. They don't really become fully connected to. You're maybe 30 years old. And so you're messing with your brain and you're denying it the right chemicals it needs to completely connect the way it should be to be a healthy brain. And so it's much more damaging to a young brain. On the other hand, young brains can heal faster than old brains, so you can recover a little better. So you got to realize that you've got to look at what's going on in their life, and you've got to find a way. And this is the tough part. I mean, it's easy to say, I just told them they can't do it. I'm just going to be a tougher parent. I'm going to do all these things. It's not going to work. Rare if it does. You can chain them to the sink or whatever. You guys probably have a lot of cases like that where people did something like that. I saw one on the TV the other day, but you can chain them up or something like that, lock them up, and they're still going to, as soon as they get out, they're going to do everything they ever wanted to do. And, just to spite you at that point. So that's not the solution. The solution is to work with them to find a healthy self-identity.
So, John, I want to pursue that just a little bit further, if you don't mind. I know that there's a lot of guilt for parents who have children that have struggled with addictions. And I know that you just mentioned it. One of the go-to behaviors for parents and for state systems is this, what they call tough love. We're just to lock you up, or we're going to deny you. But you just said that really doesn't work.
You can't not have it. I mean, there's extremes, and I wouldn't go to any extremes. You got to be a source of solidity some point. You can't just be flaky. But at the same time, I think coaching always works better than telling, than bossing, And I believe that we can find some answers if we look at sports psychology. Is how do you go in and create a mindset where people are really engaged in positive values and manifesting those values. And I think sports psychology is probably the best domain of literature that we have that tells us that. And, we think that some kind of other type of psychology might be working, but I don't want to sit around and talk about my mama, or my dad or all that stuff with some Freudian, when I can talk about going out into my gym. That's a motivation for me. What is it that turns me on? What is it that gets me out, gets me doing stuff that's healthy? And I think helping people find that, that's what I do as a professor. That's my job. I have students that take classes from me, and I can sit there and tell them what to read and test them over it and all that stuff. But really what I want them to do is connect to it. I really want them to connect to what they're reading. So I give a lot of variability in how they connect. How do you want to understand this stuff that you're reading? Because I don't know everything. Certainly not. I mean, you read it, you tell me what you know about it, what it does for you, what parts of it you like. How does it relate to your life? How can you use it? What are you going to do with it once you learn it? Those are the things I think are important in helping somebody find a reason to learn something. And I think the same thing's true in helping somebody find a reason to get sober or to find a positive life. I mean, we're talking two things. We're talking brain health, and we're talking a life that has fulfillment in it. You destroy your brain health and you're not going to have a very good life. There's just no way you can, when you're not fully part of your life anymore. You're hijacked by your desiring and by this need, this compulsive need that's actually self-destructive. On the other hand, if you find something, I don't know what that something is. Nobody does. Viktor Frankl didn't, and he said, if you got it, you're going to live in the constant. Viktor Frankl, just for your audience here, was a psychiatrist. He was a German psychiatrist who was captured by the Nazis. He was Jewish. His whole family were killed. All of his family was killed. Frankl himself lived, and he said and he was in a man's camp, and he said young men would be brought in, and they were robust, big, muscular guys and stuff, and 2 weeks later they died. And he was interested. It just hurt, piqued his interest. Even though he was in his concentration camp, he was still a smart man. And he said, it's the will. They lost their will and they died. But an old man come in and had a lot of will, but was just nothing but skin and bones, and they'd live. Okay? So we got to hook up. What is that? Okay? What is that one thing? Viktor Frankl couldn't tell that other prisoner what the will to meaning is, but he could tell you need one, and that's kind of what I would tell the parents. You can't tell your kid what the will is, what they need to mean, what matters to them, but you can sure make sure that something does. And that's the key. Find something that matters and foster that, encourage it, make it grow, make it overwhelm all these other things. And at that point, if you can do it, then you're going to make a difference. But it's not the parents' fault. I mean, all too often, parents want to blame themselves more than they deserve, or sometimes less than they deserve, So it's not all the parents' fault. It can be, if you're a certain type of parent, you might abuse your child and they're looking for an escape, or you might just not give your child any kind of rules or anything, and they're just out. They're just unleashed, so to speak. So somewhere in between, rule systems and freedom systems is a good, healthy area. And I think we've seen studies where it says that suicide is greater on those extremes. If there's too few rules, people tend to in that environment they tend to commit more suicides. If there's too more rules, if it's too restrictive, they tend to commit more suicides. Somewhere in the middle, it's not that way. So I think that drugs are the same thing, and life is the same thing. We've got to find somewhere in the middle where we have enough structure to have a healthy life in a world of others. If there weren't any others, you wouldn't need any structure. You just make it as you go along. Or if you're an old narcotic agent, you just make it up as you go along. But seriously, though, in a world where you have to have others, there has to be some structures, and you have to respect those. And then you also have to have freedom. Otherwise, there'll be no reason to live.
So, John, we're getting close to the end of our time.
Okay.
Are there any effective strategies for parents to help their children prevent becoming addicted to drugs?
Well, I think knowing more about what it does to you, kids right now, you say, oh, well, drugs are bad. They'll mess your brain up. And they look at kids that they know and they don't see that their brain's messed up. So, but you don't see this. The brain is a strange thing. I can take a drug addict's brain, cut it out of the dead one, take it out, dissect it, and I don't see any addiction or anything like that. It looks like a normal brain, but I don't know about the parts that were working or not working. You'd have to be part of that brain or somewhere to communicate with. So we don't know what's going on in somebody's brain, but I can tell you that if they're doing drugs, they're damaging it. And if they were going to be a baseball pitcher, their pitch is going to be slower every time and less accurate and less ability to do things that baseball pitchers do with a baseball. That will decrease rapidly as you mess with your brain and do things that are not conducive to making you a better athlete at that point. Or if you want to be a musician, I know a lot of great musicians have died from drugs and everything, but that's just because the world was not a place they could live in very easily. And it was because they had problems. It might have led them into music as a form of expression, but I know a lot of great musicians who are still alive, and had a more structured environment. They weren't the rock and roll stars necessarily. Maybe they did classical music, Segovia, for example. So there are a lot of people that made a life out of that. So it's just a matter of, I think, really teaching them up front what really happens with drugs. And the second part is actually finding out more about your children and knowing them better. Yeah, and I don't mean being their buddies necessarily. You want to be their coach. You don't necessarily have to be, your coach doesn't always have to be your buddy. But they have to be able to buddy up with you a little bit, but they're your coach. And I think parents ought to be coaches, life coaches for their children.
Yes.
I think that would be the best thing you can do for your children to keep them off drugs, is to be a good life coach and do the things. Read about coaching. And it doesn't have to be, you might read about coaching a baseball team or something, but you can also coach somebody using those principles. You can coach them anything. If they want to ballet dance, or if they want to play music, or if they want to be a scientist, or if they want to be whatever in their life, a salesman, or you name it, politician, anything they want to be, it can be coached. So coach them, make sure they have the resources to succeed. And when they find success in their life, when they find something to live for that they're interested in, and they've been coached, and they have that emotional support and emotional management stuff that you teach them when you're coaching them, and teach them how to accomplish something. You don't start out knowing how to do it. You have to learn these little things first, you know? And when they learn that, then they have a way of growing. And that way they can get from this moment to the next moment without killing themselves or starting to use drugs.
So I just want to remind our listeners and our viewers that Forge Your Trail is a program that provides free coaching services to fathers and parents. So if you're interested or you feel like you would benefit from some coaching, please check out our website. So, John, I want to finish on a sort of a positive note, I hope.
Okay.
Let's say there's somebody out there that's right now struggling with their addictions and struggling with their parenting skills, and they're concerned about the damage they may have done to their brain from years of abuse and drug abuse.
You're talking about me.
So is there hope?
Always, man, there's always hope. You know, hope is I've really spent a lot of time looking at the nature of hope. And hope is my vision of myself in the future that I want to be. Okay? Now, then all you have to do is say, what do I have to do in the now that's going to make me more like that? And you could do it. I know I've done it. I've been the craziest man on the planet. You know, I've done some dangerous things. I was addicted to danger when I was a narcotics agent. I loved going into a raid, going through a door when there might be somebody on the other side that was going to shoot me. I was addicted to that feeling. And when I got away from that, it was a weird world for me. It took me a long time. I had to find other paths. And I know people that have been distraught. And what the corollary of that world that I was telling you about there is that you lose everything if you're like that. You lose everything. You lose your family. You lose all those times that you're out seeking your thrill. You're not at that family reunion or that birthday or that anniversary. You're ignoring all that and you're living for that. So you live and die for the same thing. Okay, so I lost all that. Okay, now then, where's the hope? You know, when you don't have anything, you don't have anybody, when you don't have a job, when you're hooked on drugs and don't have enough money to even buy them, you're having to steal to buy them and things like that. When you're not able to raise your kids because you can't even manage yourself, you know, what's going on? Okay, you either keep doing that or you got to find a place in the future. You got to find a vision. And once you have that vision of yourself getting out of this, and once you have a vision of yourself doing those things that you wish you could do, then you try to do that in every moment that you can. And I think that's the way out. It's psychological, but it worked for me in my life. And it's worked for people that I've seen. So hopefully any of you out there, I'm always here for you any way I can be.
Our guest today has been Dr. John Duncan, who is a philosophy professor and an expert on the impact of drugs on the brain and an expert on addiction. John, will you come back and talk to us again sometime?
Love to. Anytime.
Thank you very much. You've been watching the Forge Your Trail podcast. Thank you again for listening. Forge Your Trail is a program made possible by a grant from Oklahoma Human Services through Oklahoma Child Support Services. Our mission is to provide educational resources and support services for Oklahoma parents, with a focus on helping fathers improve their relationship with their children. We also teach a parenting class called On My Shoulders that's free of charge for participants. To learn more about our program and upcoming class sessions, please visit our website at fyt.oucpm.org. Thank you very much, John.
My pleasure. Thank you, Frank.